Hey guys, it's Courtney and welcome to day number 4 of Kit Week. Today I am looking at the Tonic Craft Kit, which is brand new to me. I love Tonic products, but I've just never gotten the kit before. So this is going to be brand new for me. It is sealed. I have not opened this yet. And from what I've seen online, I think this is a different box than what's usual, but it is still the same contents. So before we actually take a look at all of the things that come in this kit this month, we are going to go over some of the subscription details for this kit. So they do ship to other countries, so this all will be in US dollars. So the kit is $39.99 per month. You can do a quarterly subscription, which is $97.99, so you save a little bit of money there. And you also have the option to do one-off purchases, taking a chance that they may be sold out. So once they're gone, they're gone. So it's best to probably subscribe if you don't want to miss out. You do have the option to cancel your subscription at any time. And for as long as you are a subscriber, you get 10% off of all orders in the Tonic Studios store. So let's dig in and see what comes in this kit. So first, we do have a sheet that comes in the kit that gives you all of the contents that are in the kit, as well as where to find some inspiration as far as videos and things like that go. This is kit 29. I know by the time you guys see this, kit 30 will be released. So keep in mind, it's going to be a little bit different from the latest kit. So we'll take a look at the stamps and dies first. They come in this folder type thing, which is great because they kind of just... they stay put. It's a good way to store them. You do have a little sticker here made for you by, and you can just fill in your name there. The stamp set is called Dot and Drop. You can see that there's butterflies and a dragonfly, as well as some sentiments that go along with that. There are two different die sets here. Well, they're separated into two. I should say it that way. This is the Dot and Drop butterfly die set. You can see that you have a ton and tons of different dies here. You have the little fluttery lines. You have just the wings of the butterfly. You have a couple of flowers there. There's a lot of different options that you have with this die set. Next, we have some Nuvo drops. So we have 3 different types of Nuvo drops here. First, we have the crystal drops, which this color is Velvet Sage, which is so pretty. And this is just the regular crystal drops. Then we have some glitter drops that will closely match the crystal drops. And these are Spring Frost. Very pretty color. It's kind of like a minty color. And we also have vintage drops, and this is Coral Blush. It's obviously a pinky corally color, and I don't have any of the vintage drops, believe it or not. I love my Nuvo drops, and I do not have the vintage drops, so now I get to try those out. Next, we have some sequins. We have 2 different kinds. We have silver and gold. And I love Nuvo products and Tonic products because they come packaged so nicely. It's so easy to keep these in the little jars. Next, we have a hybrid ink cube, and this is called Powdered Peach. And we have markers. We have the Supreme Metallic markers, and I've never used the Nuvo markers. I don't think these are alcohol. These say that they're water-based, but we're definitely going to test these out. And you get 3 in this pack, and you can see that you have a bronze, a silver, and a gold. And finally, we have the paper, which is the most important thing for card makers. So we have a package of card bases and envelopes. So we have 10 card bases, 10 envelopes, all A2 size cards and all white. And then we have a ton of paper in here, and I'm blown away by this paper. It's so much fun. Some of it's embossed, some of it's kind of almost like a fabric feel to it rather than a card. Some of it has shimmer, some of it has sparkle. It's a ton of variety and tons of texture here. So I should have fun playing with this. So you get lots and lots of variety, not just your plain old cardstock that we all have a ton of anyway. So now that we took a look at what is in kit number 29 for Tonic, we are going to dive right in and create 5 cards with it. Okay, so for our first card, I have a piece of the glitter cardstock as well as the kind of like a rose gold cardstock, and I'm cutting this large die from both of them. But I only worried about positioning it in the glitter cardstock because that's actually going to be my card panel. So I needed to pop out all of these little pieces, but the die really works well. I mean, I really didn't have a problem popping all of these pieces out, even though the cardstock is pretty thick. So I kept all the little pieces in the die from the rose gold cardstock just to make my life a little easier. I went ahead and adhered my glitter cardstock down to my card base, and you can see that I'm putting adhesive in all of these little teeny tiny areas to make sure that it is completely stuck down and completely flat. If you don't do this, you're going to have little bubbles that come up in between the little spaces of the die cut. So you want to make sure that you're using a wet glue preferably, and you get in all those tiny areas. Next, I'm going to go ahead and just do some very simple die cut inlay. And this took a while. I'm not going to show you all of it because it did take quite a bit of time. But by leaving all of these pieces in my die, I can kind of grab what I need as I need it. Some of them fell out, which, okay, that's fine, but it was just easier to take out one piece at a time. For the little sections, I guess you could call them, inside the little flowers and the butterfly and dragonfly, I didn't bother to try to die cut or inlay those pieces. That way it'll give a little variation and a little bit of a pattern to them anyways. And I just didn't have the patience. This probably took me about 15 minutes, about 15 minutes to get all of these little pieces where they needed to be. So I just didn't have the patience to go with all of the teeny tiny pieces inside the flowers and dragonfly. So once all of that was done, I also die cut a small little butterfly from the rose gold cardstock as well. And this will just go where my sentiment is. And for my sentiment, we're actually going to be stamping directly onto the mirror cardstock, that rose gold color, to kind of match all of the other things. Now, you want to be careful what ink you're going to be using to stamp on this particular kind of cardstock. I was going to use my StazOn, but it is bone dry. I probably haven't touched that ink pad for about 3 years. So, I mean, there was nothing. So I ended up stamping out with archival ink. And the first time I stamped it was very crooked. But that's actually good because I can use that kind of as my test. This will smear in the beginning. Once it dries, it shouldn't smear, but I went ahead and heat set this just in case. And then I rubbed my finger along the sentiment that I stamped crooked. And as long as it didn't smear, then I know I'm good to go with the other one. So I went ahead and used my tonic trimmer here to cut this down to a sentiment strip. And I just took my scissors to cut one side of it, the left-hand side of it, kind of at an angle just to add a little bit of interest to that. And then I went ahead and popped this up with some foam tape right in the upper right-hand corner. For my little butterfly, I wanted this to kind of pop up too, but the middle of the butterfly is way too tiny to be using foam tape. So what I did was I creased this right there in the center, and I just used my nail. You can use a scoring tool or a scoring board for this if you want it to be perfect. But this way, I just kind of created my own little score lines with my fingernail and then just added a little bit of adhesive right to the center of the butterfly. That way his wings are kind of fluttering. And then I finished off the card with a few of the Nouveau vintage drops that come in the kit. And that is it. That is card number 1. Moving on to card number 2, we're going to be using some more of the dies from the kit. And I'm going to be using some of the layering dies. And you can use these on their own, or you can use them together. So you can see that these fit nicely together if you actually know what you're doing. Because I couldn't get this to work, then realized it was just on the wrong side and upside down. So once I got that figured out finally, I'm going to be using the cardstock that comes in the kit. I believe this one is the Pearl Ripple. It's kind of has some embossing to it. It almost looks like fabric. And I'm also going to be using the glitter cardstock. So I cut the largest, I guess the largest layer of this butterfly from the glitter cardstock, and then I cut the next 2 layers, which the 2 that kind of fit inside just kind of creates the pattern, I guess, in the butterfly wings. So I lined those up and stuck those down with some Post-it note tape. That way they don't shift around as I run that through my Gemini. And then I'll just adhere these pieces together, and they fit perfectly together. They're made to fit together, but I do recommend using wet glue for this. That way you have a couple of seconds to shift things around and make sure they're exactly where you want them to be before it becomes permanent. And there's another die in the set or in the kit that is kind of like the fluttering lines. I guess there's probably a more technical term for that, but all it is basically piercing in the shape of like the flutter. So I went ahead and lined up my butterfly the way I want it to be on my card panel, and then positioned that die, stuck that down again with some Post-it note tape so that it doesn't shift around, and ran that through my Gemini. So we're going to go ahead and assemble the card now. Now for my card panel, this pearl ripple cardstock is cut just a little bit smaller than an A2 size card. That way I have a border on all 4 sides, and this is one of the card bases from the kit. Went ahead and adhered that again with my Tombow Mono Multi Glue, and then adhered my butterfly right on top of those little fluttery lines. And you can see that I put that upside down. Luckily, another reason to use wet glue, I had a couple of seconds to pull that up and switch around my card base. Went ahead and popped up my butterfly with some Scotch foam tape and lined that directly above my little pierced lines there. And then I'll finish off the card with a sentiment. So again, using a sentiment from the stamp set, you can see that I just dropped my ink pad, this is VersaFine Onyx Black, so it's a little bit muddy like, and of course it landed face down directly on my work surface. And I went ahead and stamped out the sentiment directly onto that pearl ripple cardstock, and then I'll cut that down into a small sentiment strip. Now I wanted this to pop out a little bit more, so I'm also going to line this onto the glitter cardstock. So I like to stick this down to a scrap piece of the whatever cardstock you're layering it with, right on the corner to kind of space out the border that I want. And then I can trim down the other 2 sides to sort of kind of make it as even as I could possibly get it. And then I will go ahead and pop this up again with some foam tape directly on the lower left-hand corner. I finished off this card with some of the sequins that come in the kit, and I am using some of the silver sequins, and I glued these down again with my Tombow Mono Multi Glue, kind of scattered those all throughout. And then for the centers, and this will kind of make sure that they don't shift around in the mail, I use some Nouveau glaze, the crystal glaze, just in the center. And I learned that trick from Kelly Letavola. She typically uses glossy accent. The crystal glaze is pretty much the same thing, and it will dry clear, so you'll still be able to see the sequins through it. So that is it. That is card number 2. Moving on to the 3rd card, we're going to bring out the stamp set this time, and I have a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and this is cut to 5.5 by 3.5. No, 3.25. Sorry. So it's a ½ inch. I cut a ½ inch off of both sides, and you'll see why in just a minute. Went ahead and stamped out my dragonfly, which, by the way, fun fact, I'm terrified of them. Absolutely terrified of them. I don't go outside if one's around. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and color this with my Copic markers. And I'm just using greens and blues here. I'm not doing anything real special. Just adding a little bit of shading on either side of each section of his little body, and then blending that out with the lightest color. I really wasn't happy with the contrast or lack of contrast I was getting, so I ended up going back in with that darker color and added just a little bit more. And then when I go back to that lighter color, I'm barely blending it out. I'm pretty much just adding a dot or 2 of color just to sort of kind of blend it out. Next, for the wings, I'm going to move on to some BG markers, and these colors I picked because they closely match the Nouveau drops that come in the kit. And I'm just adding a little bit of shading on the base, or not the base, I guess the part closest to the body of each little section of his wing, blending that out with the mid-tone, and then I'll finish off with the BG70, which is super, super light. So I went ahead and colored out all of his wings and then forgot to zoom out. So I really apologize. You're not going to be able to see much for a couple of minutes, but I cut 2 strips of the paper that come in the kit. This is the Geometric Galaxy cardstock. And so I cut these to a 1/2 inch, and I like to I like to put my glue down on the card base itself. It's just easier for me to line up the little strips of the pattern paper or whatever I'm using on either side. That way it'll kind of frame in my dragonfly in the center. Now, to finish off the card, those little fluttery lines that we had in the previous card, I'm going to create with my Nuvo drops that come in the kit. Went ahead and stamped out my sentiment first, and then I'm taking both of the Nuvo drops that come in the kit, both the crystal drops as well as the glitter drops, and I'm just going to kind of create my own little fluttery lines. So I'm kind of going in the same type of shape with the glitter drops first, and then I'll bring out the crystal drops and kind of fill in some remaining areas, I guess you could say. Now, the first one I got a little too close, and naturally the glitter drops are still wet. So if they are still wet, they're going to kind of merge together. So don't do like I do. Either wait a minute or space them out a little bit more. I finished off with a glaze pen, glaze gel pen, black, and I filled in teeny tiny dots in between each of these spaces to kind of fill this in completely. And that is it for card number 3. Moving on to the next one. Again, didn't realize at this point that I was not zoomed back out, so we are going to be still a little close, but I am going to use the stamp set once again. I have a piece of white cardstock. This is just Nina Solar White, and I'm working on a scrap piece of paper because I'm going to be stamping off my card panel itself. I went ahead and treated that with my anti-static tool, and I'm going to just stamp these butterflies all around the border of the entire card panel, kind of rotating them in between, and I'm stamping directly off the card panel itself. So sometimes you're only going to see a little bit of the wing, and it's kind of hard to tell, especially on camera, where I'm stamping, but in real life you can kind of move the card panel around and you can see the shiny outline of your image. Once all my stamping was done, I went ahead and sprinkled on some white embossing powder and then heat set that, making sure that my heat gun was heated up for about 30 to 45 seconds before bringing that to my card panel, and that will minimize the amount of warping that you get. Next, we're going to do a little bit of ink blending, and you will want to make sure that your embossing powder is completely cool before you do this. And that only takes about 20 seconds or so. But if you bring an ink blending tool or a blending brush directly to the paper when your embossing powder is still hot, it's just going to move the embossing powder. So I'm using the hybrid ink that comes in the kit, and I'm using a blending brush here. And you can see that I'm going to slowly build up the color, and I'm going basically from the edges of the card panel towards the center. So my darkest areas are going to be on all 4 sides. And as I kind of go around, my goal was to keep this very light, but I was a little heavy-handed, so I had to kind of keep going around just to make sure that the saturation of color, or the amount of color that I was adding, was somewhat even on all 4 sides. Once I had the ink down on all 4 sides, I'm going to slowly bring that ink towards the center. Now, this is going to sort of kind of fade to white in the center, which I'm fine with. That's the goal. But you can see a little bit of the tint of color. I basically just bring that brush in circular motions towards the center until there's no more ink showing. And you should get that good fading look. Once the ink blending was done, you do want to make sure that this is dry or somewhat dry. It doesn't have to be completely dry. Just let it sit for maybe about a minute or 2. And then you want to take a cloth or a paper towel, making sure that it's completely dry. And you're going to rub directly over your embossed images. And this is going to remove any ink that is sitting on top of the embossed areas and really kind of bring your images to life. You'll be able to see them a lot more once you take off that remaining ink that's sitting on the embossing. So next we're going to move on to the sentiment, and this was a little bit of a disaster. I was trying to stamp the sentiment with that hybrid ink using a stamp that comes in the set, and I must have squished too hard, forgetting that this is a brand new ink pad, so it is very juicy, and it didn't come out so well. So in order to cover that up but still match everything, I'm taking a scrap piece of paper and I just rubbed my ink pad directly over that to kind of make colored cardstock so that it matches everything else. I did let that dry for a few minutes, and then I stamped my sentiment with the VersaFine Onyx Black ink, again using the same sentiment that I planned on it. Then in order to bring that black out a little bit more, I'm going to trim off a little tiny bit on all four sides of my card panel, and then take a black piece of cardstock that is cut just a little bit bigger than my card panel and a little bit smaller than my card base. You guys have seen me do this again. This is just going to really make everything pop. I have a small black border, and then I'll have a small white border. Then for my sentiment, I'm going to do the same thing as you've seen me do again before, and I am going to trim this down into a small sentiment strip, line this onto a scrap piece of black cardstock, same way as I did before right there in the corner, trim off the other two sides, and then I popped this up with some foam tape directly in the center. So moving on to the fifth and final card, I have that rose gold mirror cardstock. It's actually called burnished rose, but to me it's rose gold. And I have a piece of the Barely Blush pearlescent card, and I am cutting the pearlescent card to 4 1/4 by 4 3/4, and then I have a 3/4 of an inch strip of the mirror cardstock that will go on the bottom, so that when you put the two pieces together, it's an A2 size card, if that makes sense. Next, I'm going to go ahead and take some of the butterflies. I'm taking 4 of them, and I'm going to go ahead and die cut them from both of the cardstocks, both the mirror cardstock and the pearlescent cardstock. And these are going to kind of get sort of layered together. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere this pearlescent cardstock to the top portion of my card base, again using wet glue, so I have that couple of seconds to move things around. And then I will adhere the mirror cardstock directly on the bottom, so it kind of gives you a seamless look. Now for my butterflies, I'm going to start with the mirror cardstock, and I'm going to just kind of line them up the way I want them, starting at the bottom with the largest butterfly and kind of moving up towards the smallest. And I'm going to go ahead and adhere these down flat. Now keep in mind that this is not regular cardstock, so they are not going to adhere permanently with wet glue immediately or within a couple of seconds like you normally do. It may take a couple of seconds for them to become permanent. Once they are permanent, I am going to go ahead and adhere the other butterflies of the same size directly over them and do the same thing as I did for the very first card. I'm going to go ahead and crease those so that I have just the center, and just put glue right there in the center, the body portion of the butterfly, and then adhere that directly over the mirror cardstock. So I have a little bit, I guess you could call it a shadow underneath each one of them. Now for the sentiment, I'm going to bring back out a scrap piece of the pearlescent cardstock, and I'm going to stamp my sentiment with Versamark ink. First, I treated that with my anti-static tool, stamped that with the Versamark ink, sprinkled on some white embossing powder, and went ahead and heat set that. No surprise here, I'm going to do the same thing, cut this down to a strip, adhere this to the scrap piece of mirror cardstock, and then cut the remaining two sides and pop that up with some foam tape right there in the lower right hand corner. So that is it for card number 5. Here is a quick look at all 5 cards that we created today. As always, I will leave the supplies listed in the description box below, as well as the information if you wish to subscribe to the Tonic Craft Kit. Thank you guys so much for stopping by today, and have a great day. Bye.